That's how we take our masters, and the powers of these masters don't reflect our own. We have none.
Think critically, think long term, try and change the world for the better. Just know that you're not going to do that on Tuesday.
All right, well, hello. Welcome to this week's Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori.
And yo, I'm actually settled now, so maybe we can actually get the podcast out on time. Apologies to that for last week. And maybe we can have decent audio quality moving forward, huh?
We're very professional, as you can tell.
All right, let's get into it.
All right, so for our first segment, we have the Shitty Minutes, which is where one of us rants about whatever's grinding our gears this week. It is Austin's turn, so what do you got?
All right, I am not going to be very professional, and I'm going to rant about why I'm hungover today and how there needs to be a cure for hangovers. This is bullshit. Elon Musk is spending billions and billions of dollars, and NASA is spending billions, and we're going to end up spending trillions of dollars to try to send people to fucking Mars, and yet people can't go out and have some goddamn beers and dance on Halloween weekend and then not be hungover. What the fuck is up with that? I am tired now. In Las Vegas, apparently, they're providing this service, and it's a service where you can get an IV of fluids directly put into your body so that you can continue the party, and it will curb the effects of the hangover. But it's like $150 just to get this. And to be honest, it looks a little shady because it's like a van of a bunch of drunk people and they're all just sitting there and they're just getting needles put into their body in Las Vegas, which does not... I mean, I guess Vegas is kind of professional in some ways with certain things, but that sounds shady as fuck. So there needs to just be a way for us to not be hungover and still allow us to drink. Because I know that people are going to be like, oh, I know how you cannot be hungover. Just don't drink too much alcohol. Oh yeah, just don't have fun then, asshole. Come on. What the fuck? Shitty minute over.
That was the first shitty minute that was actually a minute, I think.
I mean, it's not a very developed or articulate point. It's just very simple and somewhat Neanderthal. And that's my shitty minute this week. I actually was going to do something a little bit more profound, but I woke up and I've been hungover all day. And I'm like, well, this sucks. I
feel like a night of drinking without the consequent after effects for the next day. Isn't that kind of like the ideology that Zizek always talks about, like the Coke without the Coke?
Is it?
Yeah, it's like I want to have Coke but no sugar in it, or whatever.
Yeah,
it's like
I want to have Coke but not have it rot my teeth. But then it's not Coke. Isn't
that part of the identity of the night of drinking? Because you're saying basically, carpe diem. I'm gonna screw tomorrow.
Is that well? Then you know what? I recant my shitty minute. I am going to embrace all of my hangovers.
Would it be less fun if you knew you could do a night of drinking and be fine the next day?
I mean, I don't know. Okay. You don't have a hangover when you have sex, and there are no, negative repercussions from, well, okay, I shouldn't say that. People die from, AIDS and shit. And people die from, sleeping around and stuff I'm trying to think of stuff that's good. I'm thinking, candy. That all has sugar. It makes you fat. It rots your teeth. Is there anything that is just good? That is just purely good? With no consequences?
Well, I mean, yeah, Plato would say so. Like the abstract form of the good.
Yeah, but he's full of shit, so...
Yeah, I mean, you can't just grasp that, right? In a particular?
There is not a single... People, tweet at us. I can't even think of a single thing that is good that, you can't indulge in without having some sort of negative consequence.
There's got to be a risk involved, otherwise you don't find it good anymore.
Well, there you go. I think that's... For some reason, this is just rocking my world right now. I can't think of I'm thinking like fishing. I love fishing, but you can't fish all the time.
And you got to kill something.
Yeah, and then you got to kill something. Fishing's great. What about just spending time with people? What about just community?
Yeah, but
is there ever too much of that? What about you want to see this? This is called professionalism. This is going to be professionalism because this is what's called a segue. What about direct democracy and the freedom of people?
Dude, you're the worst. That's the worst segue I've ever heard in my life.
Well, on that note, let's get into the main segment. We are going to be chatting about democracy, sort of, this week. We're going to be talking about arguments against democracy. And obviously that was a terrible segue, but one of the things that we're going to kind of explore are the merits or lack thereof of direct democracy, representative democracy, monarchical power, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be talking primarily, we're going to kind of break it up into three, I guess, paradigms. So represented by a select couple of figures, and then I'm sure the conversation will roam and meander from there. But first, we're going to talk about Plato, not Play-Doh, but Plato. And then we're going to chat about James Madison, one of the framers of the Constitution and writer of the Federalist Papers. And then we are going to chat about Nietzsche, who represents a sort of probably more radical view of all three. But Troy is going to introduce Plato first. So what you got to say?
And I think real quick, little preamble. One would be, we're going to talk about this from a philosophical perspective. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of a lot of, poli-sci type stuff, or it's going to be a very big picture, obviously, since we're going to do this in like 30 to 40 minutes instead of,
right.
many years worth of monographs.
Centuries. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be a philosophical perspective. And we thought that in America at least, voting happening next week on November 8th, that not that we want to encourage you to not engage in democracy. Of course, you should vote. But at the same time, to think critically about the process you're engaging in while you engage in it would be the idea, right? Yeah. It's not like a puritanical, we're going to, not vote if it's an imperfect system or whatever, but just the sense of, while we make our decision for the best of the world tomorrow, we should also think critically about the long term and what kind of society we want to live in more of the abstract sense.
Right.
So with that said, now we can't be blamed for whatever repercussions come from people listening to this podcast. Plato's argument against democracy is a bit of a unique one, because when he's talking about democracy, he's talking about more of like a direct democracy, like an absolute democracy where every single person is equal or has equal power. And if every single person has equal power, then nobody has equal power, or no one has power in a sense. And so there are no pure direct democracies in practice at a large scale today. They've only really ever happened on very small scales and not lasted very long, for reasons that Madison will tell us about in a little bit, as far as his view. But I think a good way to sum up Plato's argument against this kind of absolute direct democracy as an ideal is from the ship of state. It's an argument that he makes in the Republic, or an analogy that he forms in the Republic. And he asks us to picture like a ship. And this ship is, at sea, and it comes into a time of danger, like a storm or whatever it is, and the captain becomes incapacitated. And so the question is, what should the crew on the ship do as far as electing a new leader or making decisions about how to get themselves home and out of danger? And Plato says, well, the individual on the ship who is best equipped to lead is the navigator. Right? That's the person that's been trained, that has the knowledge of what's good, or at least what's the most efficient and best way to save the whole crew and get them home and do what they need to do. But at the same time, the temperaments of the navigator, given that they have this knowledge capacity, is not one that's going to win people over easily or sell themselves as a leader, be charismatic, spirited in all these senses. Whereas those who are able to sell themselves, who are able to convince the rest of the crew that they would be the good leader, are usually not the people who have the knowledge to actually get the ship home. They're the most spirited individuals, the most charismatic, the ones who are able to sell themselves. The opposite of what really needs to happen. And Plato really gets down into it in the Republic, talking about, the most spirited individual who's able to sell themselves is going to take the drinks and goods from the captain's quarters and divide them up amongst people so that they get their goodies, their welfare, and then they'll vote for the person or whatever. Whereas the navigator really cares mostly only about trying to figure out how to act best rather than how to get the votes necessary to win an election. And so Plato's notion is, look, democracy goes against the public good and the common good in an abstract sense, in that when you have these pure democracies, it tends towards people's more, he would call it the appetitive or desiring part of their souls, so that they'll vote for, elect, support people who will give them things that satisfy their desires and not actually do what's for their common good. So you can think of it like, are you going to, support the parent, if you're a kid, support the parent who's going to give you extra candy, or the parent who's going to make you or set rules that will ensure that you do well in school tomorrow, like having a good bedtime and not playing too many video games and eating a balanced diet? Well, the kid's always going to, support the parent and show more love to the parent that gives them more candy. Whereas we know later on in the long term, that's not what's actually good for the kid, and that the parent who was setting boundaries and rules was doing what's best for them. Now, whether or not that's a patronizing analogy, we can discuss, but that's Plato's notion, is that democracy tends towards what's not what's good for people, but just what they desire, and is in the long term is bent towards destruction. Is that a pretty good summary, you think?
Yeah. That's a pretty good summary, I think. It's interesting when you read. I'm doing this reading group, obviously, out here. I think I mentioned it last week on Plato's Republic, and when you read it, it's so interesting that Plato seems to really believe in like specialization, right? So he talks a lot about all these examples where it's like the shepherd does this, the navigator does that, the ruler does this, and it's very sort of limited. I wonder how he would view a world today where everyone is sort of, you're forced to be a kind of polymath, right? Where the navigator isn't just a navigator, and the person getting the people to vote, so to speak, in that analogy, isn't just that, but the person is also supposed to be a navigator, and you're supposed to be a scientist, and you're supposed to be one that has the capacity to act and stuff like that. So there seems to be much more of kind of like a division, and if that, in Plato's mind, doesn't sort of, I guess, weaken your capacity because you're not aiming directly at the one thing, and therefore your ability to act within your sphere of influences is diluted.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to Plato's notion of the soul, right? The tripartite theory, and that we all kind of have specializations that are just innate to us. And doing best for the community means finding what that is and following that role in the community. So that if you're a person who's led by your spirit, then you probably shouldn't be a ruler. Right? That's not your best. That's not your best role in society. But if you're, meant to be a guardian, then that's what you do.
Yeah. And so it's got that sort of like teleological essential element to it that sort of limits people's abilities. I guess, so what is your sort of engagement or criticism with the Platonic understanding or exposition of democracy that you just kind of put out?
Well, why don't I say that what I support about it, and then you can kind of push back a little bit. I mean, there are areas in Plato's Republic that are asinine and that are like extremely offensive to our modern moral understanding. There's an idea later in the Republic that the best thing for the actual community is for children to be taken forcibly from their parents and divided up amongst the community, so that there's no sense of nepotism and favoritism and everything. And that couldn't be more both ridiculous and offensive in a moral sense to our understanding. Although there's something kind of interesting about that idea, just that, I mean, not that I would ever advocate doing that. So please, nobody come and destroy me on the internet for this. But there's something somewhat interesting about the notion of if you did have your kids taken from you and divided up randomly across the population, would people be as racist and xenophobic and bigoted as they are if they could end up with an African-American child or an Asian child or an Hispanic child if they're white, or vice versa, and they didn't have a biological attachment to the kid?
Right.
That would be kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I mean, fuck it. I mean, maybe here goes my political career in one sentence right here. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of think it's an interesting idea. Of course, you would never advocate just, okay, this is what we're going to start doing. But I think as a thought experiment, and I think in the limited ways in which certain communities have sort of had a similar kind of communal sharing of the parental responsibilities, I think it does seem rather interesting in what it would yield in its results, because you wouldn't have that like proprietary ownership. Like I've talked with so many people who have wanted to have children, And I chat with them, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I ever want to have my own kids. Maybe, but I don't know if I ever want to. But I would definitely be inclined to adopt, right? And people look at me, and some people are like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. But then other people are like, well, but wouldn't you also want your own kids, or don't you want your own kids? And I'm like, well, I don't know, man. The world's fucking overpopulated as shit. There are so many children out there that need a home. And if I'm in a position where I'm going to try to build a home and do that sort of nuclear family unit thing, why not take in a child that needs it, who from, a mother who's sick, or a mother maybe who's too young, who wants to give it up for adoption, or, you can adopt from other parts of the world. I think that there's something really valuable about that. And people have very often, in my experience at least, come back with the idea that it's the idea of this creation. It's this mini me that, you look into it and you're like, I made this. This is me. And I'm like, well, isn't that fucking weird and kind of grotesque?
It's so insidious, man.
It's so weird, man. It seems so weird, that impulse. But then again, with that said, I had a friend, Scott, who does listen to the podcast. So what up, Scott? I think it was Scott that said this. Well, whatever. I'm attributing it to Scott anyway. So, who said something along the lines of like this being like an amazing art project. Like, oh, he did say this to me. I remember because he's like, oh, you love like art and, the imagination, creating society. He's like, think of this. This could be like your ultimate art project. This child that you create from your DNA, and then you instruct them in the ways of the world and introduce them to sports and fly fishing and their first, whatever they're into, dancing or music or theater or driving a car or whatever the fuck the little thing would be interested in. And yes, I just did refer to my future child as a thing, but
it's a person though.
Yeah,
that's what kind of weirds me out about that analogy.
Right,
that it's a person.
Right, it is, but that's what it is anyway, though, isn't it? Anyway, it is a person, but you are creating a person, right?
I mean, I think we're using the term creation in an equivocal sense there.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, art is raw materials, and so you try and approximate it to some ideal you have, right? But if you do that to a person, that seems to offend our moral sensibilities a little bit more, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, maybe that's why when he said it, it was kind of like, I think he was being a bit tongue-in-cheek about it. But I can kind of see where people would think that, oh, this is my creation, this is my little mini-me. I think that there's something of that impulse that my friend was talking about that's kind of in that mentality as well.
Yeah, and even if you have that analogy there, though, I'm kind of wondering, I mean, is there anybody less well-equipped to do that than someone's parent? Like, does... I
thought you were going to say, is there anyone less well-equipped than you? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, than someone's parent. Like, they're the worst person to do this because they're both so biased and have the biological instincts and everything, and they're so close to it that they can't really abstract and think critically about it.
Well, that's why this communal idea is kind of interesting then, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Is that, it offends our moral sensibilities because the idea would be the freedom is taken away.
Right.
But also the authority is taken away. And your child is like your creation, and so you want to mold it into what you are, and then it becomes Anthony Perkins in Psycho and starts killing people. So that's the ugly version, right? But does any system in society or any structure in society create more suffering than the nuclear family? Like, I bet probably 85-90% of people, the most like suffering inducing part of their life is their immediate family. Luckily, I would count myself as not among that group, but that's
me too.
I also know that that's extremely rare based on people that I talk to.
Yeah, it seems like it. And not only that, though, but there are childhood, not traumas in a cataclysmic sense, in like a world bending sense, but in a sense that the ghosts that I'm constantly chasing, a lot of it stem from just wanting my dad's approval, or a lot of them stem from getting certain amounts of attention from people in my family unit, or these sort of embedded habits or the embedded desires or wants. Those things were conditioned so much by the people that I spend so much time with and have those deeper connections with. So even in someone like myself who would say I had a ridiculously loving and supporting family unit, even I would say that I'm sure that there are specters that haunt me, that I'm constantly chasing, that have shaped the rest of my life. And it's from, a seemingly sort of like very simple group or collection of people, and something that's just extremely common. Everybody has a nuclear family. Whether or not it's fractured, everyone has, some sort of relation to a family.
Yeah, it's the thing, right, is we can talk about this as being like a creative art project kind of a thing. What if you knew in creating some piece of art that if you did something a little bit wrong or without thinking about the long-term consequences, you could cause your art to suffer immeasurably for the rest of its existence in a way that it could never fully control or normalize? Like, that would be pretty anxiety-inducing, I feel like, from both angles. And so, yeah, I mean, all that aside, I think the idea here is for Plato, the reason why these kinds of notions and all the other practical notions in the Republic about how to form this ideal society offend our moral sensibilities is because we equate freedom with the good. We equate choice with the good, lack of authority over us with the good. And that's the exact notion he's trying to dissuade us of and say, look, having the freedom to choose does not necessarily mean the good. It could also mean you're destructive towards yourself because you don't necessarily know what's best for yourself. Especially if you're in a society where you don't have the tools and means to educate and to have the influences around you that can help you. And I think we also just, that's intuitively really obvious also. I mean, you can talk to anybody. If they don't have those good influences and if they come from a negative background, then they're going to often say, yeah, for a long time in my life, I didn't know what was good for myself and I made really poor decisions. That's kind of the regular human existence in most, relatively free societies today.
Okay, well, I kind of cut you off because we started talking about Plato taking children away. So what else? What else do you find, I guess, valuable or that has merit in his argument?
I mean, think just on the flip side of that, the idea of the common good. We don't really have any notion of public society as contributing or being directed towards a public good anymore, right? Everything is just about managerial stuff. It's just, how do we keep the roads open? How do we keep the hospitals open and functioning well enough that we're not upset about it? And really, government should only really be about that. There's no sense in which there's a public move towards what's good for everybody, what provides a good life.
Well, because the answer is just the stimulation of individual freedom, right?
Yeah, that's your choice. That's the private side. You choose what's good for yourself.
The right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is supposed to be the common good that unites or that does stand as the sort of telos of the United States Constitution and the United States experiment.
Which, of course, is totally false because then that ends up meaning you have to work 40 to 60 hours a week in order to spend your weekends doing the thing you think is the common good. When it's like, well, what if the common good, what if the ultimate good life means, in a sense, not slaving away, selling your labor to somebody else? So then, yeah, that whole idea is just, outstripped from the first. It's not even an option. So yeah, I mean, as much as we might complain about certain aspects of Plato, the argument against democracy as being an argument about the purpose of community is an important one to consider when we're thinking about, the purpose of our public sphere.
Yeah, and of course, as philosophers, I mean, I kind of vibe with his idea that the rulers of a given society would be the philosopher kings. I can get down with that. I can get down with that a little bit, Yeah,
it's a little on the nose, though, right?
Yeah, a little bit, maybe.
Plato's conclusion through all the theorizing is that, yeah, people like me should rule.
Yeah, but here's the thing. For people who are listening who might not be as familiar with it, the reason he thinks that is because he believes that the philosophers wouldn't be interested in self-interest. They would only be interested in the pursuit of the good, and therefore their lives as true philosophers, because a philosopher is the one who lives in seeking the good. Or as he would say later in one of his other dialogues, I don't know if it was later, I can't remember, but in Phaedo, he talks about how a philosopher is basically the one who's closest to death, because death is the pursuit of that which is immaterial, the good, the pure forms, and in life we're kind of taken away from those things as we're embodied. And so it's by seeking the good that you're seeking death, and that's really what the life of the philosopher is. So if we're going to kind of bounce back to what he's talking about with the ideal society as being ruled by the philosopher kings in the Republic, it's this idea that these philosophers, their lives are completely dedicated to the pursuit of the good with a capital G, and therefore their lives they wouldn't be corrupt. So even though it is a little on the nose and you're like, oh, so the philosopher wants the philosophers to be in charge. He's not saying that for the purpose of abusing power. He's saying it because he genuinely believes that the philosopher is the only one who truly would be equipped to actually care for others selflessly in the pursuit of those, I guess, beneficent ends.
Which on one hand sounds as ridiculous as possible, right? Because we know a lot of philosophers and they are definitely as self-interested as any other human being, perhaps even more so. Yeah. So it's hard to find somebody who actually has that pure pursuit of the good, right?
Right.
And we have that notion of absolute power corrupting, right? So even if you did have those intentions in the beginning, once you have that power, it's going to take you over and become nefarious in the end. But at the same time, I think we do have a sense that some people are better equipped for that than others. And the very notion that we say absolute power corrupts tells us that, well, maybe it's less about the person and a little bit more about the system itself.
Yeah, and what if you had these philosopher kings who weren't actually engaging in any sort of social relations, but they were just kind of like locked away completely, and they were just able to like create rules and stuff like that, but there was no reciprocal relation, because that's what it seems like, right? It's like the network of relations that's going to lead to the corruption of power. So what if like it was just these philosopher kings and queens, I guess we'll say, philosopher leaders that are just completely isolated, and that's where they ruled from. Not that they were detached from the world because they were receiving information through the interwebs or something like that. You know, I mean, obviously Plato didn't have that back then, but, you know, some way to receive the information. And then, of course, they could create dictates and they could create policies and things like that. But there was no risk of contamination because they were completely isolated. Yeah,
so then you end up getting into all those like young adult dystopian novels at this point, right?
I was thinking like a Charlie Brooker episode maybe for Black Mirror would be this. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds really, and they get all that information through the internet, and they're abstracted from everything else. And you can see that ending up with like the classic utilitarian idea of the leaders being like willing to sacrifice some segment of the population for the greater good or whatever. And this horrible atrocity happens or something. That's a straight up Black Mirror episode, right? Because they don't have that empathic connection with people anymore because they're removed through the networks. And so they're willing to just sacrifice people. But I think Plato's notion would be, no, people only do those kinds of things, sacrifice human beings as if they're just units or, you know, median goods, because they are in a system that treats people like that. Like, it's actually more that we have this commodity fetishism idea where human beings are just units of happiness or units of utility for the economic calculus that ends up convincing us or enabling us to treat human beings like that in that horrible way. If you had a society that was built upon the notion that human beings are the most valuable thing and that we should care about their good most of all, even above, you know, economic expansion or production, then you probably wouldn't have those scenarios. Now, he might be wrong about that, but I think sometimes we're less critical in assuming, you know, this is the only way we can build society, and human beings can only have one nature based upon and not really affected by whatever, you know, public system or political system they're actually involved in. Politicians talk all the time about, in interviews when they're candid, that, you know, this enterprise is soul-sucking. They have to spend hours and hours a day on the phone cold calling all their donors and playing nice to them so they can continue getting the contributions they need. And they do it in the... I heard this podcast that was talking about politicians having to do this, congressmen and women having to do this. And it sounds horrible. It's like the worst thing I can imagine doing with my day, spending hours cold calling people, begging them for money. And then we expect those people to go in and make decisions for the good of the public. Like they've lost their soul after several years of doing this, and so it's no wonder they're all cynics.
Well, this might be a really good transition now into Madison then, right? Because Madison was a pretty ardent critic of direct democracy in favor of the system that we have, representative democracy. And I'm just going to start off by reading a quote from the Federalist paper number 10. And he says this: a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will be felt by a majority, and there's nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party. Hence it is that democracies have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have, in general, been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. So, in other words, for Madison, democracy historically has never lasted. I don't know exactly what he's referring to. I don't know. I can't remember if he actually elsewhere, talks about individual instances when there have been sort of these small direct democracies, like small communities or whatever. But basically, direct democracy does not work because historically hasn't worked. And then in other places in that same Federalist paper and in other correspondences and letters and things like that, he talks about how really it's kind of, and he doesn't use the word the rabble. I think the latter individual that we talk about, Nietzsche, might say that. But he talks about the sort of discordant voice of the individual people is going to constantly be subject to the whims or the fancies of the small majorities that take place, and they can turn at any minute. And these people aren't going to be, the ones who own the land. They're not going to be educated. They're not going to be the ones who actually understand how to govern. And so their their choices and their decisions are going to be capricious. They're going to change at a whim, if you will. And that's no way to order any sort of stable government. So you have to have representative elected officials. Now, here's where the problem is, and I'm going to jump straight into a criticism and without even just fully analyzing it. Madison believed that property owners were the ones who ought to have been representatives within given states. Now, property owners were the wealthy. Poor individuals didn't own land in the early sort of agrarian capitalist democracy of the early United States, right? And so now I know that there were the North was more industrialized rather than agrarian, but still, even then, the people who owned the rent seekers, so to speak, the people who owned the means of production, the ones who owned the factories, the one who owns the land, the ones who owned property, they were the ones who were going to be the ones that were able to be the representatives. So much so, actually, that when the original Constitution was formulated, the Senate was not elected by individuals. It wasn't, I believe, until Woodrow Wilson when the Senate was elected directly by the populace. Before that, it was the individual representatives within the states that would vote. In other words, the property owners, the landholders, the wealthy, the ones who were the representatives, they were the ones who chose the Senate. And the Senate, of course, of the two branches in Congress, ultimately have more power than the House of Representatives. And the reason for that was to give property owners, to give these representatives who were in the framers' early minds and in Madison's mind, to give the individuals who were better equipped to actually govern the dictates and the codes and the laws and the actions of the country. It was those individuals who were wealthy. Those were the ones who were best equipped to do that. And that's what he meant by a representative democracy, because he basically thought that, the everyday person, everyday individuals were ill-equipped and would ultimately kind of, just jump back and forth between their decisions based on whatever they were feeling within various situations in various moments.
Yeah, so we have the Electoral College and the Senate as these classic anti-democratic checks,
right,
on what the people would actually vote for and desire in a direct democracy. But even before that, there's a sense in which I think we could all say Madison has a point, as far as people being ruled by their passions and at their whim in a direct democracy, and that being bad for stability in a society. I mean, look at California. We deal with this every single election cycle because we have the ballot initiative process, where we have usually 7 to 12 initiatives that are direct democracy and are democratically voted on, and they often cause great things for the state and often cause terrible situations for the state that are almost impossible to ever reverse.
Oh, yeah.
Prop 13 was the classic one it was in the early 80s when Reagan was the governor of California, and the Californians voted to freeze property taxes.
Yeah.
And that's caused huge revenue problems from raising taxes, and is probably singularly responsible for all the terrible schools that exist in the California system, because schools are tied to the property taxes and stuff like that. And it's horrible, but of course people voted for it because they didn't want to pay more money in property taxes. And of course people are going to vote for that. It's in their own personal self-interest. So whereas maybe a legislature would realize, hey, this is going to cause huge problems down the line, and we should not do this even if it's popular. But at the same time, it also can be a great thing, because when we're voting on marijuana legalization in this year on the ballot, and that's a thing that all the people in the legislature, even though California is overwhelmingly Democratic and they have almost like supermajority power in every part of the state, they don't have the incentive to do this. Like, it's much better for them to just let it be on the ballot, the people do it, and then they don't have to deal with we passed this, since it's kind of experimental and all that. So it's a great thing in that sense. You can kind of see both sides of the argument, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's like something in me that wants to believe that direct democracy is the way to go. You know, I sort of have that kind of anarchist bent. That's the flattening of all hierarchies, and you have hierarchy only in a functional sense, not in any sort of ontological sense or any absolute sense. So obviously there will be divisions of responsibilities and divisions of leadership based on people who want to do certain things or people who are better geared to doing certain things. But at the same time, I do love the idea theoretically of a pure or direct or radical democracy. But it's fucking messy, man. It's messy. But one thing I think is interesting is in the age of the internet, with clicks, there is a sense in which there is, God, what would you call it? It's almost a democratic activity through economics, right? So I heard a story once, and I don't know if this was just an anecdote or not, but I think it's pretty accurate. But it was like Walmart used to sell milk that had, the RBST and the RBH, the bovine hormones and whatnot in them, but that consumers basically banded together and stopped buying that and started buying all organic milk, or the milk that was hormone free. And now Walmart only stocks that milk. So there is a power in the consumer that is sort of a democratic action, a direct democratic action. Now, of course, there are conditions of economic control and ideology and things like that we need to factor into that. But pushing that aside for a second, there is a sense in which you cast a vote with the dollar that you spend, or you cast a vote with the clicks that you pursue online, or the websites that you visit and things like that. And those are the things then that are going to get fed back to us, right? The things that we consumers choose to engage in. And that's why you get all these futurists and technologists that talks about the future sharing economy as being driven by prosumers. We're producer consumers because we're consuming, but we're also producing in our consumption and vice versa. And that, I think, is something that's kind of interesting. And I don't know, I don't want to be like, the internet is going to lead to the utopian world of direct democracy. But it does seem that there's going to be, I feel like there might be like a withering away of the power structures as they have been traditionally over the past few hundred years into some new morphed ideological control mechanism because of the age of the internet and the way that individual consumers directly communicate with politicians through Twitter, and that the way that we cast votes by clicks and by spending things and whatnot online. It does seem like it's kind of moving in a different direction, or in an interesting direction.
Yeah, I'm going to go Black Mirror on that one, though. I think it'll be horrible.
You do think so?
I mean, even when we have the prosumers, right, there's going to be the leeching patent office, on top of that. And so it'll basically just mean that those who own the means of production will be made rich off of the system where
you
they're
can't patent
rent-seeking.
information. You can't patent information. I mean, certain types of information, but that's why the open access, open design community is flourishing and is growing so rapidly. Like, that's why, so there's a young kid, his name was Easton LaChapelle, I believe. He was, like 10 years old or something like that. And I don't remember the story, but it's got like one of these beautiful mythologies, right? That it almost sounds like out of a novel or something. But it was like, he encountered, I think, like a child or something like that needed a prosthetic arm, and found out that the prosthetic arm cost like $50,000, $100,000, and that this kid couldn't get it. So he dedicated himself to like trying to build cheap ones. And he started doing this, when he was literally in primary school or in elementary school. And by the time he got to be like 14 or something like that, he was designing these prosthetic arms that people could build. Open access. He released the design open access. People could build from home for like $300, and you could 3D print, or he built one with Legos. There are all kinds of different things, and so now you have all these people that are building these prosthetic arms for their children or for their spouses or for themselves even through the availability of open access information. And that stuff, once you start that, you can't stop that. I mean, it's like a bacteria, but in a good way. It's eroding at the proprietary controls of patents and things like that.
Well, you can certainly stop that. You just stomp it out. I mean, what did car companies do to Tesla? And what has ExxonMobil done to more sustainable modes of energy production? I mean,
the only way you could do that then, but you'd have to restrict internet, right?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it'd be like, downloading music and movies. You can't really stop everyone from doing it when it's really easy. Right?
Right.
But you can still find ways to leech off the process. There'll be compromises in there, but I'm sure they'll still find ways to. My argument is not that that's a bad thing, that we should not want open access to everything. Of course we should. But that the idea that with technological production and increase, that we're just going to find a withering away of those modes is not going to happen. They're going to fight to the they're going to fight to the end about making sure they can leech off of whatever possible rent-seeking modes they can get.
Yeah.
And so it's more like the economic structure behind these things needs to be changed alongside of the technological progress. Otherwise, the progress will be stifled, or will at the very least, even if it continues, will be divided up unequally, so that those who already own certain means of production will get huge swaths of it, and you won't really have any sense of equality.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that a little bit last week when you were talking about the phrase book, or the week before, right? Where you kind of have to have all of those. It was those four corners, right? That you need to kind of have all of them. And you're right. There does need to be a sort of consonant economic transformation, as well as a technological, as well as a social, as well as a political transformation, because those things are all entwined, I guess. But I guess if I can be a little bit more typically me and be optimistic about this, first, I do think that we are witnessing this revolution. God, I hate that term. I don't want to say revolution, but I'm thinking like in terms of the Industrial Revolution. Chris Anderson calls it the third Industrial Revolution. And I do think that we're kind of in it right now. We're in the early stages of it, like the assembly line has been built. We don't exactly know what it's going to do, or, the development of the steam engine. We're seeing it right now. We don't exactly know in hindsight what it'll produce, but I do think that that's what's happening, and that in 50 to 100 years from now, I don't know, man. I think that there will be a withering away of the traditional power structures and the traditional proprietary claims. But you're absolutely right. Rent seekers will seek ways to adapt. And that's what's so brilliant about capitalism, right? Is that capitalism is eminently adaptable.
The Industrial Revolution is a great analogy, right? Because you have these different strands and ways you can look at it perspective-wise. In one sense, you can be like, hey, with industrialization comes in, all the advances in medicine and, structures in the actual home and in public that ensure easy access to basic goods like water and plumbing and whatever. And sustainable food production, people live longer, they have access to medicine, they're healthier, all great things, right? But then you also had, like child labor and people working in horribly adverse working conditions and dying when they're 30 if they're poor, and not having access to a lot of the things that are, the medicinal technology and things that are available because, it's expensive. And does that really equate to a better life? Does longer life mean better life? Not necessarily. Now, that doesn't mean we should stop industrialization or stop technological progress. Of course we should continue those things because you need those to have a better life, but they're a necessary but not sufficient condition for a better life. And sometimes it seems like we kind of equate those things with just an automatic better life. That's kind of Plato's argument, right? that the good life is something above and beyond even just longer life or more pleasurable life.
Okay, well, let's transition now, kind of look at Nietzsche and then maybe some concluding remarks. I do want to say one thing just in conclusion, not because I'm trying to bash America, but I do think that it is important to understand that Madison's argument is an argument, and that so many of the early founding fathers, we look at the founding fathers so often that like they were these brilliant geniuses and we need to go back to their ideas, and we often hear that they need to be revered. They had some brilliant ideas, and the American experiment is a brilliant experiment in the development of a democratic nation and the development of a nation state, absolutely. But with that said, they still wanted power to be controlled into the hands of the wealthy, and it was built into the Constitution. Yeah, exactly. They wanted a plutocracy, and it was built into the Constitution. So I think it's extremely important to understand that, because while what they were doing in their time was radical, now looking back, we can say, okay, they still didn't go far enough. And that's why a sort of like Marxian criticism, I think, is so important moving forward, because it's saying, yeah, okay, the shift from, I guess, monarchical days to sort of liberal democracies was a good one. But nevertheless, liberal democracies are still driven by that power structure that is rooted in economic wealth and economic prosperity. So that's so important to understand, and that our Constitution is built on that. And all the fucking Western constitutions are. Yeah,
if you want to follow the American spirit, don't do it by saying, we're going to do exactly what they thought was cool. Do it in the sense of, as radical as they were against the monarchical systems of the day, we're going to be as radical towards them. And be like critically thinking about them. Are they really actually what's good? Is mercantilism and stuff like that actually an effective way to organize society? And then, after thinking critically, be willing to do radical things with it.
But okay, so now Nietzsche on democracy. Now Nietzsche's a weird one. So yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the Nietzsche idea here would be a good way to conclude this, just because it would kind of upend a lot of the notions we've been talking about and values we've been talking about, and we can kind of discuss really quickly whether or not we think there's something there. Yeah. So Nietzsche's critique of democracy really turns people off, because he basically is just like, democracy is about stifling the will to power. Every human being wants to exercise their internal, desire to rule and dominate. And some people are meant to do that, and some people are meant to be followers. Some people are eagles, some people are sheep, and the eagles come down and they kill and eat the sheep or whatever. And so democracy basically makes you repress all those abilities if you're the eagle, and if you're the sheep, it makes you think that you're more like an eagle. It gives you some arrogance that's undeserved. And this basically kills all human potential for greatness. I mean, people today hear that, they're just like, okay, this is like some crazy fascist bullshit, right?
Well, and that's what he gets, because obviously a lot of his ideas did get co-opted into the National Socialist organization in Germany. So a lot of times people align him with that type of idea, with sort of Hitlerian logic.
Yeah, and what that really lacks is the notion of the genealogy that Nietzsche is doing. He's not trying to say like, oh, the Aryan race are the rightful rulers, and everyone else should just be followers and be dominated. No, he's doing a critique of our notions of equality and freedom. And we were kind of viewing this through the Foucault lens, which we talked about in a previous episode, in the sense that we talk about equality and freedom as these ultimate, they're these buzzwords, but they're these ultimate values that we want, right? And both Democrat and Republican will say equality and freedom and mean completely different things by them, and usually not have any meaning behind them in a way. Right. And that will be like, I'll get elected through those buzzwords. Right. But they do have some meaning, at least like implied meaning to them. And usually is like, it needs to be questioned. And I think Nietzsche does a pretty good, effective job at saying, hey, when we talk about equality and freedom, you're not talking about anything than a different way to dominate. It's just more insidious because you're dishonest about it. Like, at least the eagle just eats the sheep and does it in front of everybody and doesn't give a shit what you think, right? Then you know what's happening. But when you have these masks of equality and freedom on top of it, you can dominate people and then tell them you're not doing it, or that it's their fault. Or, if only they could do X, Y, or Z, they'd get out of it. And that really masks all the modes of production that are underneath that and the primitive accumulation, how people got into the places they are in the first place. In essence, is equality really our highest value? That's what I think Nietzsche was critiquing. The notion that if everybody has equal power and we, take the powerful and take away the natural power they have and we give more power to the weak or whatever it might be, then we'll have a good society. And
this reminds. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's a pretty important thing to think about, right? I mean, that's not true. Just having equality, in some sense, does not make a good life or a good society.
Right. This reminds me of Chantal Mouffe's democratic paradox, right? Where for her the paradox of democracy is that tension between liberal freedom and equality, and that they don't harmonize well together, and that they do have a sort of conflictual nature, and that's why there is this ingrained agonism, which is her thing now that she's really interested in, is agonistic democracy. That democracy is it pushes forward through agonistic tensions, and I think that tension is embedded within it, according to her reading, because of that paradox, because of equality versus freedom. And for Nietzsche, obviously, he would ultimately want to stimulate the latter, the freedom, the capacity, the power, rather than the former. And I think the former is sort of that weak-mindedness that you kind of get in communal societies. You get in sort of a Christian logic, that you get in a lot of these notions of what are perceived as kind of like leftist ideals, right? And that's why Nietzsche is oftentimes considered to be an opponent of the left. But I'm not so sure that that's exactly what's going on in Nietzsche. I don't know. What do you think? Does he fit well within a leftist political agenda or desire? If he's so opposed to the idea of equality because it stifles freedom and it stifles the creative capacities of individuals, can you still be leftist?
I mean, you got to do kind of a creative reading, right? But I think it's there. Like the strains of it are there. Just in the notion that, if equality is our highest value, then that's going to kill a lot of what the creative aspects that make us human. That does not mean that we just defend the status quo, and the status inequality, or the inequality that already exists inside, is embedded in the structures that we have right now. Certainly not. And Nietzsche wasn't about that anyway, right? He was not like a defender of those things necessarily. No. He calls the masters happy idiots, right? That's not necessarily like the ideal to ascribe to, but in essence, we still need to question this notion that equality is the highest value. It's certainly a value, but that the good life comes from being equal just seems to me kind of demonstrably untrue. We would want to become more equal so that we can have a good life. It seems like
it's instrumental.
Necessary condition. Yeah, it's instrumental, exactly. And that, I think, enables us to think about equality itself even in a better way. So that we don't think about equality in just terms of material production or access to certain goods, but we could talk about it in having, more time or health or things that we could value even outside the economic system.
Right. That's why I kind of like, it's sort of an abstract idea, but I like the idea of life or vitality, right, as being a sort of higher good that is aimed after. Or, I mean, even if you want to use the Aristotelian idea of eudaimonia, flourishing, not in the way that he did, because he had it wedded to a certain teleological end that I think is also stifling. But this idea of flourishing, for some reason, when I say the word, I picture a fucking field of like poppies that are just happy and in the sun and alive, and and there's bees that are doing their bee thing, and of course there's fucking chaos as well. But I'm talking about it just looking at it from like a sort of pictorial representation of something that seems to speak to me of flourishing. I think that image for some reason stimulates a certain affect that I like, that seems to be a sort of interesting notion to pursue rather than equality. Because when equality is your highest end, it can lead to totalitarianism, right? And that's one of the reasons that people are so afraid of large-scale leftist activities, because the Soviet Union seemed to be, at least in a certain historical reading that a lot of people like to criticize, the Soviet Union or China or North Korea, I guess now, but particularly China and in the Soviet Union, is that they wanted this equality, but this equality stifled individual capacity, and it stifled that pursuit of individual freedom or whatever. And so people, I think that equality will lead to that. And that's why you get so much pushback from conservatives in America against the quote-unquote liberal left, or the regressive left, as they like to call it, right? That if everything is just equal, then it takes away my freedom, you know? And yeah, and then there's all this debate. Well, it's it's equality of opportunity, not equality of actual material things. So I'm not sure exactly how to work my way around what would be a better way to talk about it. But I definitely think cutting through equality and looking towards a sort of higher abstract or a better abstract concept for me seems to arouse certain affects that make me that sort of gear my disposition, I think, in ways that make it so that I'm both sensitive to the transformation of those future images, but at the same time it also motivates me to want to combat present material inequalities and alienations and et cetera problems.
Yeah, I think a good kind of practical illustration of this would be like education. I often talk to people, because we discussed the whole free college thing when Bernie was running for the Democratic nomination, and Hillary's moved to the left on that issue, and she's talking about, what is it, something like free education for everybody making less than $125,000 a year, something like that, right? And so her tagline was kind of like, Trump's kids shouldn't get free education, but everyone else basically should, right?
Right.
Which is like a really, as much as I favor speaking out against and mocking Uday and Hussein, the Trump kids. It's like, that's fun, but is that actually how we should structure society? Like, means-tested programs usually fail, and universal programs oftentimes don't, for that very reason, because we consider them to be a public good when they're universal. And education should be. And then you'll talk to people, even teachers I talk to, and they're like, not everybody has to go to college. If people want to, if education isn't their thing, they should be able to go and do a trade school thing or whatever at a high school, and we don't need to have everybody go to college. And well, I get the sense in which there are people who struggle in college, and we shouldn't require people to go to college just to make enough money to live. Obviously, that's horrible. But I mean, should we not value knowledge and education and a publicly informed society that can make democratic decisions for the good of themselves and their family and their nation? Like, that's the thing we shouldn't want people to have or be able to participate in. I feel like, yeah, that's an absolute value we need to have. And so we really should have as much education as possible available to people. It doesn't mean that we should stop criticizing the fact that there's some like bourgeois aristocratic features of education, higher education, as it is today. Of course there are, and they shouldn't be that way. They should be more equal. They should be more democratic. But for the purposes of making a better society. And sometimes the leftist, or sometimes the quasi-leftist argument that we shouldn't make education so universal, I think tends to do that fetishization thing, where it's like, let's stop being aristocratic and let's just accept that some people don't have to go to college, and just kind of forget that whole idea. And that's the kind of thing that I'm saying. I get what you're going for there. I understand that, but I think that's a little bit more short term than it needs to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what you're talking about is a wholesale transformation of the purpose of education and the purpose of society. And this is where you're you're sort of being influenced by Plato, right? In the seeking of the good, that education isn't just a means end to go get a job.
Yeah,
so the
exactly.
reason now that people are like, oh, well, people don't need to go to college and go to a trade school. Well, again, what are you talking about? You're justifying the purpose of education because of economic means, and that economic ends, I'm sorry. And that is what you're advocating is something completely different, that education is a good in itself. Or if it is instrumental, it's not instrumental so that it can get you money, so you can make more money, so you can have a boat, even though boats are nice. And as Daniel Tosh says, when he talks about, he's like, people always say that money doesn't make you happy. And he's like, really? Have you ever seen anybody that has a wave runner that's not happy? Yeah. He's right. He's fucking right, man. Okay. But
like saying you were knowing somebody who was on coke that wasn't happy. Well, yeah, they're happy when they're on it.
Yeah, exactly. Free wave runners for everyone. That's my political campaign. But you're saying that education should be serving a different end. And it's that end that is more important. And it's that end of seeking the public good, or of human flourishing, or of the stimulation of life and freedom and vitality. And I know these are abstract concepts, and maybe we don't even know what they really mean. And maybe we can only sort of like, they're not even terms that have a one-to-one correspondence with a referent that exists in the world, but maybe you said something last week, what did you call it? A regulative principle. Maybe they're just regulative principles that stimulate us in the moment to try to fucking change things. And so it's about having a disposition that is seeking the better. And that's what I think is most important. It's not about seeking the good as an end. It's about having a disposition that will stimulate us to seek those goods, whatever they are, as we create them, as we fucking aim towards them. And that, I think, is what you're talking about. And that's not what education is now. Education now is very means end. Yeah.
Yeah, education itself would be a way to try to figure out what those terms mean, what flourishing actually is, what knowledge actually is, and things like that. So, whereas those things are left to people on podcasts on weekends, for the most part. Yeah, I mean, you could kind of think of it just as the counterfactual of what if we did all those great leftist ideas and made it so that college wasn't necessary for having enough income to survive, and we had a universal basic income, and we had all these great leftist ideas, which I think we're both in favor of, like all those things.
Fuck yes.
Yeah, for sure. Would that necessarily mean we have a better society of people who have better lives? Not necessarily. Yeah. I think it makes it more likely, but it's not going to take you there by itself, right? There's other stops purely on causal. The line. Exactly. Yeah, it's not causal. It's not a direct cause and effect relationship to there. And so we have to kind of think alongside of that what a good life would look like, and how education in that practical example would move us towards that. Whereas sometimes it seems to be like, yeah, as long as people have less work time, more money, then we'll be good. I mean, yeah, not necessarily. I can think of situations where we have those things, as great as it would be, and they would be, and then not have better lives because of it.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so wrapping up, your thoughts on democracy or arguments against democracy. What are you feeling? I feel like you've got like a little bit of that Platonic impetus, but you've also got a little bit of that Nietzschean genealogical criticism as well.
Yeah, we talked about the Apollonian and Dionysian dance, right? That's happening there too, for sure. Reason and chaos together.
Yeah, I agree.
Making the baby of direct democracy.
Yeah, direct democracy sounds great, but it's fucking messy as shit. Totalitarianism is stifling, and obviously, I don't fucking know, man.
I would just say, when you're out there in the U.S., American audience, when you're voting on Tuesday, I think you should read both Plato and Nietzsche. But probably when you're in the ballot box, do the WWPD. What would Plato do? Not the WWND. Because what Nietzsche would do, I don't even want to think about that in the ballot box.
He would scream. He'd run into the polling booth area, and he'd start screaming that God is dead, and you guys are all morons, and you don't even realize it. And then he would say, well, he wouldn't say it, but through the Lacanian ghosts that would go back in time, and they would all kind of merge together, he would say, enjoy your symptom, and he would flip over the polling booths, and he'd walk out.
You think like Nietzsche, if he were alive today, would totally like ruin every bit of whatever good reputation he might have by like calling Trump the Ubermensch or something?
Oh no, I fucking refuse to believe it, because I like Nietzsche too much. I will not allow it. Real quick, I do want to say before we sign off here, so Sartre actually wrote something very interesting about voting. Now, this is just simply because I'm trying to be a little bit contrarian to what you were just saying earlier about how you should vote. This is what Sartre says about voting. He says, they call voting a political act, but it's not. It's an act of resignation. That's how we choose our masters. Not even choose, in fact. That's how we take our masters. And the powers of these masters don't reflect our own. We have none. Now, that's dark as fuck. And that can take us in a whole different other direction. But even though I still feel a little bit of that, that's a cynicism there that is really interesting. Now, he was obviously a bit, at this point when he was writing, he was a bit more of in his anarchist phase, right? So, I don't know. Or well, I guess he always kind of had that anarchist bent to him. But there is something to that is true, that we are taking our masters as we vote. I guess it's just about taking which masters are going to serve the greater good, so to speak. Not in a utilitarian sense necessarily, but maybe more in a Platonic sense.
Yeah, for sure. My only consideration is not voting is even less of a political act. I feel like.
Maybe.
In that it's taking the master as being like some ridiculous symbolic act that nobody gives a shit about, and that the powers that be actually love. And so that's okay. I get that some people do vote, and they, in the sense, they're reinscribing that master into themselves, and yeah, that shouldn't be the case. But also, voting could help the very simple and small scale material welfare of yourself and other people.
Yes.
So you should probably do that. And don't think about it as being way more than that. Think critically, think long term, try and change the world for the better. Just know that you're not going to do that on Tuesday when you vote. You're going to just be changing a few little things.
Yeah, I agree. I already cast in my absentee ballot.
Are you registered in California?
I am indeed.
So you're voting for us to smoke pot, even though you can't join in.
It's a secret ballot, Troy, and you're not supposed to talk about. It's secret, and it should remain secret. But yes, I definitely am in favor of that. So, sweet. Well, okay, so now it is time for the segment where one of us talks about what is giving us meaning in a world that is oftentimes meaningless. Because basically, at some point in the future, the sun is going to burn up the earth, so ultimately, nihilism wins. But that's okay, because we can still find meaning in the midst of the meaningless void. And Troy, what is giving you meaning this week?
So I wanted to keep it light this week because of the heaviness of the main topic and the heaviness of the last couple episodes, I guess. So my sticky leaves this week is the one and only Bill Murray, William Murray. The Cubs are in the World Series right now.
Yes.
And unfortunately, they're currently on the cusp of losing. So apologies to Mike if when this episode comes out, they have lost the World Series. But I don't know that yet. That's going to be determined possibly in a couple hours. But Bill Murray's
2-1. It's 2-1, right?
3-1. They lost last night.
Oh no, they lost.
Yeah.
In Wrigley.
Yep.
Oh no.
So they're on the cusp, man. It's not looking good.
Okay.
But Cleveland being involved in 3-1 leads being blown has happened recently. So it's still possible that could happen. Bill Murray's a huge Cubs fan. Authentic Cubs fan. And he's also kind of like a great American, I feel like. Not because he's like, the greatest philanthropist or he changes the world for the better or anything. But he just is this example of a human being that doesn't have to play by the rules in the exact way you're supposed to in a given industry and just kind of be their own person. It doesn't have to be like, saving children from burning buildings or fighting to get us to Mars or whatever other, heroes of the American audience are out there. He just kind of is himself. And I appreciate that. He's a recluse. He's known for refusing basically all the projects that are offered to him. Only does what he wants as far as acting and work. He's kind of like a national treasure in that instance. I saw brief glimpses of some award he was getting, like the Mark Twain Award or something for comedy. They were showing himself and other comedians coming up and talking about him, making fun of him. They showed clips from some of his movies, and I'm pretty sure I've seen them all. But just, he's such a great thing to have. As much as actors and comedians can be like the dearth of human morality and virtue. He just seems like kind of a shining beacon. Like, I don't want to praise him too much, but just like this example of that it doesn't have to be that way.
Hey, in a community full of Sean Penns, it's nice to have a couple Bill Murrays.
Yeah, exactly, right? It can feel so difficult to empathize with these crazy idiots that exist in like Hollywood and stuff, but I feel like Bill Murray's really the guy you could just kind of like hang out with, and you'd feel like this is like almost like a real human being who hasn't had his soul sucked out of him in a way. Like one of the scenes they were showing in this special was, have you seen Lost in Translation?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so there's the scene where he's in Japan, right? And he's doing a commercial for Japanese whiskey or something. And the director keeps like going on these long yelling diatribes about what to do. And then the translator translates it. And it's like 2 words, be more intense. And so he keeps trying to do the commercial. He has the greatest facial acting.
Yeah.
Like, it's so perfect. And then there were scenes from, like, my favorite movie he's ever been in is Rushmore. Maybe Groundhog's Day. Groundhog's Day and Rushmore are right there.
Yeah. Groundhog Day is mine for sure.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic film. I mean, even just philosophically, it's so interesting and cool.
It is, yeah.
But, like, I was watching Rushmore, and there's this scene where he's talking to Jason Schwartzman on the phone and trying to convince Schwartzman to stop going for the girl, the teacher that they're both kind of falling in love with. And while he's talking to him on the phone, he walks by a children's playground where they're playing basketball in one of those little Tykes basketball hoops. And he just walks up and swats the hell out of the kid. Who's like 4 years old. And it's the funniest scene. And he does it so perfectly that it's super dickish, but it's also like enigmatic and weird. And so you almost kind of like it. Only Bill Murray can pull off stuff like that because you know the kind of person that he is.
Right. Did you see, is it St. Vincent? Is that the one that he was in that just came out last year?
I haven't seen that yet, though.
That's what it's called, right? St. Vincent?
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen that one either, and I really want to. I dig him so much, man. The only movie I didn't love of his, and here's my problem, is I think I've enjoyed most of his stuff. I love him. And I need to go back and watch this because everyone, when I tell them that I didn't like this so much, they yell at me. But Broken Flowers, the Jim Jarmusch film, Did you see that one?
Yeah. Many years ago.
Many years ago, and I feel like I was watching it during a time when I was trying to educate myself on film, so I was watching like weird, indie directors, and so I was watching Jarmusch and David Lynch and shit like that, and I feel like I need to go back and see it, but I fucking love him, and I think you said something a minute ago that you're so right, man. He is so authentic to who he is. There's something lovely about that. When I was younger, I was really interested, about, we'll say 5-10 years ago, I was really fascinated by individuals who were multitaskers and were successful in different worlds. So people like James Franco, who are writers, actors, directors, they publish novels, shit like that. I found that to be something very unique. Or Donald Glover, who is this brilliant fucking polymath, right? Who just does everything well. He's a stand-up comedian. He's a writer. I think he used to write on 30 Rock. He's an actor. He's a hip-hop artist. I know some people don't love his music, but at least he has, some talent there, right? I like his music. And then, of course, now he's an executive producer and writing, I think, probably the best show on television right now with Atlanta. It's either that or Westworld. I haven't decided yet, but every week I'm in love with both. But I love those individuals. But anymore, the people lately in the past year or so who I've really gravitated to are the people who just seem to be so honest and authentic to themselves. And Bill Murray he's on the Mount Rushmore of authenticity.
No pun intended.
Yeah, I know, right? No, it was definitely intended. He's definitely on that mountain of people who are just extremely, extremely authentic and very interesting. And I feel like there's something infectious about it, Yeah,
it doesn't have to be like, he may not be an authentic person in real life. Like, he may be a total cynical douchebag and, all the praise he gets is totally without merit. It's just that as far as the public can see, he takes a different path than everyone else is and that you're supposed to take. And he's very successful and does really great work that will last for many, many years. Because of that, that's just cool. I mean, you can just say it's cool and not have to do hagiography of the person, right? I feel like you can do that, and that's what he represents.
Man, you made me happy talking about Bill Murray. Your sticky leaves made me happy, so thank you.
Yeah, it was super sticky today. All right, so our next segment is bullshitting. And we're going to do a little thematic bullshitting today. Previously, we had done bullshitting on National Dog Day. And dogs are great, so that was some good bullshitting. But yesterday, Saturday, was National Cat Day. I don't know about you, Austin, but I have a difficult relationship with cats.
Oh, I don't have a difficult relationship. I think they suck. It's not very difficult. No, they're cute. Like, kittens are cute. And cats are cute. I get it. Like, cat videos, dude, I laugh. When you see the cat, sure. It's like sitting on its hind legs, and it's like air boxing or whatever the fuck it's doing, shadow boxing with its paws. They're cute as fuck. They are.
And they're funny when they're assholes too, right?
Yeah, they got attitude, man. Yeah, they're funny, man. But for some reason, and I grew up in a house with my dad, at my dad's house, that he had cats. He always had like a sort of rotation of 3 cats, and they were always around. But for some reason, I just can't connect with them like I can with dogs. Like dogs, for me, you can have an empathic relationship with, but for some reason with cats, I have just never been able to see that. I see other people that do, but it just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, cats will eat your face off if you die in the house and you can't feed them.
Literally.
Like, there are cats that do that. So
yeah,
that happens. They're sociopaths. They're complete and utter assholes. Here's the thing, though. Okay, I've had cats that are not that way, that are more like dogs. And they're friendly and they're loving, and you can have an empathic connection, and they'll rub up against you when you're sad and try and cheer you up. And they're wonderful. I've had cats that are like that, and I loved them as much as any dog. Although you can't play with them as much, so it's a little different, I guess. And I've had cats that are total assholes and want nothing more than to like destroy your existence, except you're necessary to feed them, keep them alive, so they deal with you.
Yeah.
Here's what I get bothered by with the cat thing. The argument especially comes from like leftist Twitter, which is that cats are superior to dogs because cats are assholes, but they're independent and they have their own desires. And dogs were just manufactured to be sycophants. And so they're a product of like human arrogance and whatever the hell it is. And so we should like cats more because they have more freedom over their desires or something like that.
Oh, fuck off.
Yeah, I hate that shit.
Oh my god.
That shit.
Oh my god. Oh, that's
dude,
ridiculous.
We're all fucking manufactured by social evolution, and our desires are all produced by our environment, and it's all, it's true of everybody. It's true of human fucking beings, yo.
Yeah.
Dogs are nice. Stop, like, finding ways that dogs being nice is bad.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why people don't like quote unquote left a lot of times. It's like they're always like taking fun shit away, you know? Come on, man. The left is supposed to be about experimentation and play and creativity and enjoyment of life and vitality, not like cynicism and just constant nagging. Stop fucking nagging, man. Let's just let good things happen.
Yeah,
sports is okay.
Yeah, happiness is not the worst thing. It does not mean that you fucked up somewhere.
Yeah.
You could admit that, we've done a lot of bad things to dogs through breeding processes and whatever. And also admit that you love your fucking dog because it's like nice to you and like loves you unconditionally. And that's kind of beautiful in its own unique way.
Yeah.
You don't have to excuse every horrible thing humans have ever done by just admitting that.
Yeah. I will say this. I think that cats are fucking cool in the sense that they are vicious as fuck as hunters, right? Like cats, they'll take down birds and roaches and beetles and spiders, and then bigger cats, of course, will take down humans and rhinoceroses and shit. Like, I don't know if they take down a rhinoceros, but they probably could. I bet a lion would take down a freaking rhinoceros, right? Shit. That's cool. Like, I like big cats. I think big cats are cool. Now, I don't ever want to be in like close proximity to a wild big cat. But like, I think big cats are fucking amazing. Like, they can jump insanely high. That's what's cool about cats. Like, I'm sitting in my room right now and I've got a dresser in front of me that's probably about 7 feet high. If I had a cat, it would be able to just jump from the ground up to that thing. Like, that's insane. The way that they're built they're nuts, man.
And cats are so arrogant that they'll try and do things they just aren't physically capable of, like athletic feats, and then they'll fall and they'll act like nothing ever happened, and it's just hilarious.
Yeah, that's
They're trying to pass it off like, oh yeah, I'm fine. When they're like, all their bones are broken or whatever. That's why you should have a dog and a cat. It's a great balance because the dog will give you all the affection and everything that you want, and the cat will be aloof. But then the cat will provide you with those moments of it's so aloof and has that unique personality and is kind of a dick. Then it'll do funny shit and you can make fun of him and all that, and that'll be great. Have that more abstracted, like the roommate that you kind of don't really like but is fun in a way and you wouldn't want them to leave because they have that unique personality. That's the cat. And the dog's just the one who gives you all the affection and love, and you have different relationships to help balance you out so you're not like all messed up and weird.
Can I suggest the perfect cocktail of human-animal-home relationships? I believe it would be 2 dogs, a cat, and a teacup pig.
Why the latter?
Have you ever seen a teacup pig?
Does a teacup pig just mean a small pig?
Yeah, they're those little cute little guys.
Have you had a pig for a pet?
I have not, but I have had people that I've known that have had pigs for pet, and apparently, teacup pigs make amazing pets. Apparently, they're like dogs. They're super affectionate. They're super smart. They're super cuddly. And have you ever seen a teacup pig's face up close? That's the cutest damn thing in the world. I just want to squeeze its nose all day. It's got like these big, squishy... I think that's the perfect combination. Because dogs, it's good if dogs have each other as well. Right? You're at work or you're out doing your thing. Cats, they are very independent. They don't need another cat, and they can get on well with dogs, right? Whereas dogs get on well with cats, but dogs, they like to have another dog. They like to play and wrestle sticks from each other and fight for balls and shit like that. And then teacup pigs, they're just there for the cuteness factor. And then don't have children unless you adopt, and then you're set. Boom. Case closed.
That's the real lesson, right? There's no National Kid Day.
Yeah, that's right. There is no National Kid Day. Yeah. Why not? Well, maybe
there is, but
Christmas.
No one gives a shit about it. We just do it out of guilt. You don't do it because you actually care.
That's right. Yeah, I feel you though. I guess that I have that ambivalent relationship with cats too. They are kind of cool when I really think about it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be bummed if cats weren't domesticated. Like we'd be losing out on something.
That's true. I mean, it's like coffee for me. I like it, but I'm kind of two minds about it. Like if it were taken away out of the world, that would suck. If we never had it, that would suck. But at the same time, it stains your teeth, gives you heart palpitations if you have too much of it, makes you on edge. But at the same time, it also wakes you up. You can make like a nice latte with some mocha, and that tastes good. So, cats are like the coffee of the animal kingdom. And coffee are like the cats of the beverage world.
Can you follow the analogy down to like sustainable farming practices and equitable payment to Colombian farmers of coffee beans?
Well, I'm talking about fair trade coffee here, because that would fit well with the leftist sort of support of cats, right? No, I can't. I don't know.
Make sure you have fair trade cats is the lesson.
Fair trade cats. There it is. Boom. Okay, cool. Well, then now let's kick it over to Michael for This Week in Hip Hop. Michael, what is going down?
With first-class legroom, free cocktails for everyone, and a schedule you can depend on.
Hello, welcome to This Week in Hip Hop with Michael Burns. That's me. I hope you're all doing well. This is probably going to be the quickest episode in a while. I'm a little out of it, a little jet lagged. I bounced back to Chicago for the weekend because the Chicago baseball Cubs are in the World Series. I got to watch them lose 2 and win 1, but it was still good to be there. And now I'm going to have a fucked up sleep schedule because I'm going to stay up late here in England watching them play Game 7 tonight. But by the time you listen to this, you'll already know if they won or not, so you'll be able to respond to my emotional needs appropriately, and I appreciate that. So this week, I haven't been on it as usual, but there's a few things that I still think are worth talking about. So the first thing, normally I tell you to listen to stuff, but how about this? I think there's something you should maybe read. So the New York Times today published a piece on the story behind this Tribe Called Quest album that's going to come out. The first Tribe Called Quest album in 18 years, and what now we know will officially be their last record. Album's title is We Got It From Here. Thank You for Your Service. I think it comes out November 11, but the article's by Touré, and it was really insightful. A lot of you know, all of you should know this shit. That Fife passed away earlier this year. Very sad stuff. And this article opens with the story of, I didn't know this, the night before Fife passed, him and Q-Tip were going back and forth on the phone talking about this record they're working on. So real powerful stuff. And some of you probably know this as well, but I mean, it's interesting that the genesis of this new album was their Jimmy Fallon performance. So sadly, I guess Tribe fans have to thank Fallon. But they got together to perform on the show. They were vibing. They got back in the studio. They made another record. And I'm optimistic because I think that if Q-Tip's production and his last record are any indication, I think he has a good sense of things. I don't think he's fallen off. I think he's still very creative musically. The most recent stuff I heard from Fife, he can still spit. So I hope that this record is like a fitting tribute and last word of the career of what I think is probably the most important hip-hop group, if not the most important musical group ever. Fuck the Beatles. But I hope this record can be an important statement, something that will make fans happy while also progressing the art a little bit. But I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little bit skeptical. Because, God, it would be a bummer if this record wasn't good. And the only two things that made me a little bit nervous thus far is that Jack White and Elton John are on the record. So I'm curious. Jack White, I guess I trust, good musician, but Elton John, I don't know. Do we need Elton John on the final Tribe Called Quest record? But we also have Kendrick Lamar, Andre 3000, Busta Rhymes, so it should be good. But check out that article. It's on the New York Times today, and get excited about that. And obviously, I will talk about it. The two records that came out this week that I think you should listen to, and full disclosure, one of these I've listened to multiple times. One of these I've only started listening to. First thing, Saba, rapper from the west side of Chicago, put out a project called Bucket List Project. It's on all the streaming services. You can buy it, you can stream it, all that. But it's really good. Definitely the most mature statement of Saba. Someone who I think in a lot of ways has kind of lurked like one tier down from Chance and Vic and No Name and a lot of the other figures we think about with contemporary Chicago rap. But it's a really good and really vibey project. I know that word can be a little annoying sometimes, but it's really vibey. And I was listening to it on headphones and it made me wish I was in a car. One of those records that made me just want to like roll around. The two tracks, I liked the whole thing, but track 2, Stony, I really liked a lot. And one of the final tracks, Bucket List, really good. But overall, very strong project, and I like that it doesn't over-rely on features. We know that Saba has some very famous, very musically skilled friends. There is a feature, however, from No Name that just kills. Like every time she's on a track, she just kills and has that real technical, poetic flow. So check out Bucket List Project by Saba. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And I will say, one thing I kept thinking about listening to it was, I think it's the most clear indication of the Lupe Fiasco influence on contemporary Chicago rap. And I think it's weird sometimes that we don't hear as much of that Lupe influence. And you really hear that. And maybe it's because Saba and Lupe are both West Side Chicago rappers. But I really appreciated that weaving of that Lupe influence in and out of that contemporary Chicago sound that can often drift into a certain like Atlanta aesthetic. So really cool to hear that. The other thing, some of you will hate this, that I started listening to, that I haven't listened to the whole project of, DC4, Meek Mill, it came out. I really like it so far. I have a really big soft spot for Meek Mill. I guess that might disappoint some of you. I'm going to continue to listen to it. I hope that it'll make me real happy. But thus far, really strong, really powerful. And I think Meek Mill, like, just an interesting guy, obviously. And I think he occupies a really interesting space right now in rap music because he kind of has, a foot in the streets and a foot in the mainstream world. And unlike rappers that want to jump from one to the other really quickly, he seems to be negotiating like the tension of that space. It's really interesting, but I have not listened to the whole project. Maybe it gets really whack, but it's good so far, especially the track with Pusha T. That is all for me this week. I hope that you all have a lovely one. Listen to good music, eat good food, brush your teeth and wash your face at night. I'll check you soon. Hit me up, Mick O'Brien on Twitter. I can give you my mail-in address too, but I won't. Enjoy the whole podcast. I am out.
Cruising the sky as smoothly as a bird, you scarcely realize you are traveling.
All right, sweet. Thank you, Michael. I know Michael stayed up super late last night because he just came back from Chicago so that he could watch the Cubs game. So I know he was up really late watching the Cubs pull it to 3-3, then go to Game 7 tonight. Troy, before we get into hip-hop, what's going to happen, brother? Are you watching this series?
Oh, it's been great, man.
I know.
I feel like Mike may have saved the Cubs. I mean, I know correlation doesn't equal causation, but in this case, I think it does.
Why not? Well, fuck it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Now, do you think it was risky using Chapman for, 2 innings the last 2 games?
It's going to be if he ends up fucking it up like tonight, then yeah, for sure.
or if he ends up saving the day, then Madden's a genius, right?
Yeah, it's a total, ends justifies the means scenario.
And it's the last few games of the season. He's got the entire offseason to fucking rest. You might as well just throw it out, right? But can he keep throwing at 98, 100 for this many outs?
Has there ever been more on the edge fans than an Indians Cubs Game 7 of the World Series?
I know, man.
The Indians haven't won in 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I think it's since 45.
And the Cubs in 108 years. Literally, there's going to be suicide watch all over the country.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say in terms of city expectations and city hope, Cleveland, they've already got a couple champions this year. Ohio State won the national championship in football. The Cavs won the basketball championship. The UFC heavyweight champ is from Cleveland, Stipe Miocic. So I feel like Cleveland's got enough love, whereas Chicago right now, they haven't got much love. And then when you factor in the 108 years, I mean, come on, baseball gods. Throw Chicago a bone here.
I think the baseball gods and the basketball gods have made a theurgic pact because the Cavs, came back and the Warriors blew a 3-1 lead, as everybody knows. And so the payment for that is going to end up being the Indians have to suffer the same consequence.
Yeah, maybe. Also, just in case everyone's wondering, Troy is doing his best Tom Waits impression here. So he's just been smoking a bunch of cigarettes and not sleeping for the last few days. So that's why he sounds so gravelly and sexy, I might add. But
I should go on vendors more often.
You should. Now, I know that you wanted to talk about Tribe. So Tribe, they're your favorite hip-hop group of all time. They're one of your favorite groups of all time, just in all genres of music. So obviously Fife's passing was brutal, and this last album probably hits you in the feels a little bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, I read that article that Mike was talking about in the New York Times, and it's just, damn, man, it hit me in the feels. I really hope this album doesn't suck. Just as even if it's just okay, that would be enough to kind of be a celebratory, posthumous record for Fife. I just really don't want it to suck.
Have you heard, have any tracks been released from it? Because I know there have been a couple of singles, right, that have been released in the past year?
I have no idea. I always try to stay away from those things so I can listen to it organically.
Okay. Yeah. No, I feel I didn't read the article yet, so I'll have to check it out. I'm not the hugest hip hop head, obviously, but I understand, I guess, the importance of Tribe in the history of the music genre. So I'll have to check it out just to educate myself. Well, sweet. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I, again, am going to be traveling. I'm actually about to catch a flight here down to London, and then I'm heading to North Carolina to go speak at this conference right in the middle of hurricane season. So hopefully nothing hits the coast again. But no, so I'll have the podcast out as soon as possible, and then we'll be back to normal here, hopefully starting next week. Sorry again for the last couple weeks. Hopefully, even though I'm traveling, we can get to some semblance of normality again. Hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, at @owls_@_Dawn. You can also leave comments. We just changed the website so that you can leave comments, I think, hopefully under the individual episode entries on our website, which is just owls@dawn.com. So feel free to give us feedback, and hopefully we will catch you on the interwebs.
Yeah. Das Vidania, Amerikanski.